Hey folks, John Kelly. Welcome back to the Law Enforcement Life Coach Sometimes Heroes Need Help podcast. This podcast is being brought to you by On Target Claims, where their motto is on target from setback to settlement. Now listen, a little background. I've worked with these guys on the job, on the street for over 25 years, man, and they have always done the right thing and have always had my back. Now, in this second chapter, let them have your back, right? You wouldn't go to court without an attorney. Why would you go up against an insurance company without representation, right? They represent you, the policyholder, when you go up against an insurance company submitting a claim. And I can tell you this, right? From beginning to end, they're going to be with you during the entire process. They're going to properly document that claim with the latest technology. And then when it comes time to getting things fixed, they've got a complete stable of vendors that are certified that are going to get it done right the first time. They also offer a pre-loss planning and policy review. So you know exactly what you're covered for, right? Make sure that you're adequately covered. The time to find out that you're not isn't after that horrific event. Okay. So give my friends a call at On Target Claims, 561-208-1775, or go to their website, ontargetclaims.com. They cover the entire state of Florida, offices in Fort Lauderdale and Tampa, and tell them John sent you. And now let's get to the episode. All is well. Hey, folks, John Kelly. Welcome back to the Law Enforcement Life Coach Sometimes Heroes Need Help podcast. Sitting down with Eric Tung. Listen to me. What a good dude, man. He is out there still on the job, right? Fucking still on the job. He is out there in Washington State. And I've got 20 years on this guy, and we're just like, we're talking back and forth, and we've connected, and he's just doing the work of trying to fix what my generation has done to this profession with the rub dirt on it, suck it up, drive on, and he's so insightful. He has really just got promoted to commander. He's heavily involved in the wellness initiatives of his agency, a peer support team lead. He's got his own podcast, the Blue Grit Radio podcast, bluegritwellness.com. He is the guy that I needed when I was on the job, right? Somebody that knows, that is passionate about taking care of our brothers and sisters, and we're sitting down with them today. So without further ado, help me in welcoming Eric to the Law Enforcement Life Coach Sometimes Heroes Need Help podcast. Brother, man.
That's quite the intro. Thank you, John. I'm humble, man, and we chatted a little bit before the recording, but I don't like pointing fingers. It's not your generation, and I will say everyone has a piece, right? And you had certain themes and certain precedents from the generation prior, but what I really appreciate about your generation, those that have recently retired, maybe still have a couple years left, the ones that are reluctant to let go for a really good reason because they're still in it, is they're setting the stage for us to do some big things. I mean, shoot, like peer support and just even having wellness programs for sure came from your generation. And so it's my generation's role to hopefully normalize that culture from the beginning. And then I like to say it's the next generation, those that are hiring on now, they're the ones that are going to really be able to make a lot of movement, right? I'm in this mixed kind of medium stage where, a lot of people are still really apprehensive. A lot of people roll their eyes, but hopefully, through the eye rolling, we're just normalizing it, we're socializing it, and then, officializing all that stuff.
No, man, I think that's why these conversations are so important. You would never get somebody who's been on the job 20, 30 years talking about all the things that terrified them, all their failings, all the things that they wish they could go back and fix, right? That's just that wasn't the thing, man. And we're, like you said, we're trying to normalize not being perfect. We're trying to normalize, hey, I'm not feeling really right about this. And I need to talk to somebody about it because I don't want to be carrying this with me. Those are things that your generation and what you're doing, um, this combined team effort, man. Older guys being a little vulnerable and sharing their mistakes with guys who are still in it
Hmm.
that can use that information to help the guys coming up behind you. And it's a
Yeah.
team effort, man. It's listen, we didn't get messed up overnight, right? And so we're not going to get fixed overnight.
Yeah, you put it really well, man. When you said, I'm the kind of guy that someone like you needed earlier in your career, and that's humbling, and I know that I'm just one of many, right? And the awesome thing is we're talking across the country, thanks to technology. And this is a thing, like there's lots of us, guys and gals in uniform, out of the uniform, we're working in or working alongside law enforcement and first responders that they're marching along, right? And it takes all of us to keep this conversation going and growing. But what I really appreciate, what you said was that I think that recognition is happening. A big part that I can focus on in my career was when I was starting to get a little bit more confidence in building our peer support and building our wellness programs. I was a younger sergeant, and so I still, everyone still worries about what other people think, but I like to think I'm getting better with that regard and caring
Yeah.
less and less. I think it's the gift of age is you just give
Dude, it's
zero,
liberating, man. It's
yeah,
listen,
fewer
get
F's,
there,
right?
get there as soon as you can because goodness, it's a
Yeah,
gift.
man. Yeah, man. But there's a senior sergeant and he I facilitate and schedule a lot of the debriefs, right? For peer support, critical incident stress debriefs. And he kind of came around. He's like, "Hey man, I think I've seen all kinds of scenes like this with a kid and I'm all right, but I think it'd be helpful." And the fact that he said it, he created that insulation, like that was the
Dude,
thing. And
what a
I
win.
applauded him, right?
What a
Um,
win.
yeah, and he's saying like I'm okay, but I think they could really help. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe they're fine. And I'm like, no, you did right. You did good.
Yeah.
And then he kept circling back around. And then later, that same old Sarge is like, hey man, we needed more of this stuff. And then another guy, really close to retirement, separately, but the same themes is like, if we had more of this stuff, I wonder if I'd still be married to my first wife. And those are testaments, right? It's just
Right.
recognition.
It's Eric, I'll share this with you. And so I speak a lot. I was in a room with 1,000 cops 6 months ago. I put my phone number up on the screen and I immediately regret it, right? Because it's
Mm.
just like, oh, this is what a shit show this is going to turn
You open
into.
Pandora's box, huh?
Oh, in the worst way, right? But I use it as some comedic relief, right? Because I actually have this dialogue with the room, the
Mhm.
minute it goes up there. Um, Not one inappropriate photo or comment. I, it was heartbreaking to read the
Mm.
texts and the messages and the questions. So there's a room full of 1,000 people, and a good majority of them are in some really unimaginable pain, and they don't know how to get out of it. And
Mhm.
so when you've got sergeants that have been around the block starting to come to you and going, hey, tell me a little bit more about like how I should run my next debrief and what are some resources that are available to the guy. Not me, I'm all right, but it's the guys I want. Okay, man, it's that typical, hey, I've got a friend that I don't care who it is, right? If it's you're doing it for your guys, you're not completely cool with saying you need help. It doesn't matter. The conversation's happening.
Mhm. Yeah, 100%. And most people be honest with themselves. You're like, yeah, that was helpful, or just to see that it was helpful for someone else was helpful
Right.
for me, right? You can share in that, and like, it doesn't have to be one thing. It doesn't have to be one extreme or the other. So, yeah, just to recognize like it's the low hanging fruit, in my opinion. Peer support is it's so easy, it's so simple to stand up a little policy. States might vary on what's privileged, but just the fact that you have something that's officialized where you're like, hey, we're inviting and we're supporting this culture where we want you to talk to each other. We don't want you
Yeah.
to bottle it up. And it's not a sign of weakness. It's really a sign of vulnerability is strength, and it's
Right.
cohesion, and wanting to gel with your team, which is wanting to be more effective. Like, who doesn't want that, right? Especially in a job like this.
Yeah, and it's redefining. It's
Mm,
redefining.
yeah.
I had always, the things, we thought you were a pussy in the past if you couldn't handle the situation, right?
Hmm.
You're a pussy now if you don't get help.
You're in denial, right? And no one
Right? I
wants to
mean,
be in
like
denial. Yeah.
somebody that's strong, if you're a badass, you go, you know what? I'm talking to somebody about this because that
Hmm.
wasn't cool. Like that's what an alpha does. That's what somebody that's respected does. The
Yeah.
whole dynamic has shifted in that regard. And that's why I'm so excited to have the opportunity to talk to people like you that are still in it, that are having that kind of impact. Um, because of the 20-year difference between us, I wanted to talk a little bit about culture and how we change and make things better for those coming in,
Hmm.
those still in, and those getting ready to leave. Um, and I think, there needs to be a shift in how if I remember correctly, Eric, you're prior to getting promoted. Congratulations again on that,
Thank you.
man.
Appreciate it,
Couldn't have
man.
happened to a nicer guy. You were in charge of the recruitment component of your agency.
That's right. Yeah.
How
So a year and a half in that stint, just promote out of there. It was a new effort, kind of restructuring, invigorating, innovating, because that's what we need, right? And
right?
yeah,
So in that capacity, when I came in, there wasn't a recruitment issue. It
no,
was
no.
it was how can we get this pile of 1,000 to 10 the quickest?
Hmm.
There was now we've got how do we get this pile of 10 to 1,000?
Hmm.
It's a complete change in
That's
the
like
dynamic.
literal, man. Like, yeah, it's supposed to sound, I mean, it sounds extreme, but for those that don't really know, maybe they're kind of curious of the landscape they listen in, but that's literally the thing. Like, some agencies need to hire thousands, and quality, quote unquote, quality candidates are tough. And I think it's getting better depending on where and how we're engaging, but man, it is a struggle. And I called it, when I took the role, and I debated it, of course, a long time, because I had just gotten into another specialized unit that I wanted to be a part of for years. Um, yeah, I was like, man, am I going to lose bird in hand, and I'm going to sign up for the impossible job? And I called it that,
Yeah, the
but it's what we
impossible
needed,
job.
man. Hmm.
Um, so this is where I want to go if you're cool with it. I want to go recruitment, retention, retirement with you culturally and throwing it back and forth. So when you were given this, I don't want to call it an opportunity, challenge, right?
It was both, and
Challenge.
I had to look at it that way. Yeah, so I
Okay.
love that you even said that, because it's all the same, right? I, just for context, like, I came in going on 17 years ago, and so I experienced part of that was the first kind of mind blow of people, was 2007, 2008. Prior to the recession, hiring was starting to go crazy, right? The boomers started to retire, and we still had a lot of troops overseas, which were the traditional candidates. And for the first time ever that anyone relayed, and it was in the local news, all this was people turning down job offers and picking the agency they wanted, right? So I turned down two offers until I got with my agency, just because I knew the timing was really close. And I
Right.
knew I had nothing sketchy in my background. So I was like, okay, let's go. So it was really unique, and Chiefs were talking about, we're like, this is unheard of. Like, we usually have to, test 200 people for three spots, and that was 200 people in an auditorium, kind of the dynamic you were talking about.
Yeah.
And so since then it got tougher with this recession, and then it got a little bit more balanced, and now we're at a total different dynamic. But yeah, man, so when you think about hiring and this job that has become perceivably by the public more undesirable than ever, but in the last couple of years it's shifting, because there's a lot of people, I mean, most people care deeply for their community. They want to do the good thing. And then a lot of people, after the initial shock and fear that caused a lot of officers to move into attrition, right, to retire early or to just to change careers, which I like to say no judgment. I have some of my best friends that left the state to do law enforcement elsewhere. Some of my best friends just left the industry altogether, and I get it. So I make sure to say like, hey, thank you for your service, whether it was 5, 10 years, whatever. Like
Right.
that's meaningful.
Of course.
It's you didn't quit on us, but it was not for you anymore, and I get that. It was hard.
Right.
But for those here, we need to focus on the positive, because if we focus on the negative, then we're just going to spiral down, and it's
Right.
really easy to let that permeate and be toxic. So really it was a shift of, yeah, this is an impossible job, but we're going to go down swinging. We're going to give it everything we got. We're going to throw everything at the wall, everything idea wise, and then just really frame this as, hey, let's focus on our best. Let's recognize that recruiting is directly tied to culture and morale. If we hire the right people with the right stuff, we're feeding back into the sense of hope that we're going to climb out of this and we're going to
Right.
recruit our future partners. And at the same time, I tagged it as, hey, this is the same as community engagement. I had some success in community engagement, community relations. So I was like, how is this not the same? Like it's not our job to fill our ranks. It's the community's job to fill our ranks. So that was, engaging officers. I was engaging people in the city. That was like, hey, like send your best with like my tagline. Like we need your best. And that's
Right.
the only chance we got. And, really by just being out there, being visible, just trying everything, people saw that we were making an effort, and it kind of
Right.
just kept compounding.
Yeah. The different branches of the military um, have sign-on bonuses, all except the Marine Corps.
Mm.
You know who's not asking for recruits? The Marine Corps. They, they've done a phenomenal job of self-promotion, which
Hmm.
I don't know that we do a great job of self. I'm not talking about stupid TikTok videos. I'm talking
Yeah.
about developing an esprit de corps, a mystique.
Yeah.
And
TikTok
so,
has its value at times, I'll say,
yeah, well,
but
listen, you're talking to
you're
you.
right,
This is the
because
generational thing now, right? I'll
yeah.
be goddamned if I do a TikTok video, right? Because
Well, it's
that's
branding, right? So,
yeah,
the Marines, there's branding. Like
yeah,
I have utmost respect for those men and women that have served our country or continue to serve. I didn't do that, so I don't know that, but the Marines carry with them a certain decorum, a certain etiquette, a certain tone, that you see when you
the
meet a
few,
Marine, and
man,
like
the few,
the
the
ones I work
proud.
with. Yeah, and so there's that branding, which we realized we had to do as an agency, and we as a profession need to do a way better job. When you say we don't sell ourselves, we certainly don't, because police one, I'm sure a lot of publications have done surveys where they ask active cops, like, or retirees, like, hey, would you promote this job for a neighbor kid? Would you promote it for your own kid? And the stats are dismal, right? Like
Right,
people commonly say, like, I don't want my kid to do this job. Even when I hired on, commonly at multiple agencies, people are like, you seem like a sharp kid. You look pretty fit. You sure you don't want to be a firefighter? Or you got a college
right,
degree? Why are you doing this? Like they're trying
yeah.
to turn me away, and it's the cynicism and a little bit of humor. But that's always been here as long as I
Right.
remember.
And you know what? I think you just when you said that, a light bulb went off in my head. It's not. This is a question, but I'm going to pose it as a statement, and I want you to either refute it or shed some light on it.
Yeah.
The reason why cops aren't going to their neighbors or going to their oldest son or daughter and saying, I think this would be an awesome career move for you, isn't because of the public and the George Floyd and the bullshit and the it's got nothing to do with that. It's got almost, I would argue, completely to deal with what goes on inside the four walls of our departments. The toxic nature of the profession that unless you're in it, you really can't appreciate, right?
Hmm.
It's not Hill Street Blues, it's actually pretty god awful at some places. And those officers that are immersed in that toxicity, wouldn't wish it on their worst enemy.
Mm.
And that's really the issue that ends up undermining recruitment efforts. Because if we were treating our people well and caring for them and respecting them, then they would be excited to go out there and share that great news. That's my position.
So my answer, and it might be a cop out, pun intended, I guess, but
Yeah.
it's yes and yes, like yes and no. Because I think that the external does affect us, but to your point, if the internal was strong enough, if we had the right community, the right environment to foster resilience, then it's just noise, right? If officers, in this post-Floyd era and reform laws felt like their agencies and their leaders were stepping up in a way to protect them with not just not I'm not talking about the blue line and the negative perception of like good old boy. I'm talking about with training, with mission, with directives and
What
proper
what fact finding
judgment.
before, yeah, with
Yeah, and like just hey, like we are adequately training you legally with physical training, with everything that you need to make the informed decision with what you have, and that's why we're confident that you're going to do the right thing, and that's why we're going to back you, and that's why we're going to support you, and that's and you talk about the toxicity, and I think there are definitely agencies that are thoroughly overrun with toxicity, and I think that there's agencies that are thriving and there's most of them are in the middle. Most of them have pockets, and the job of every officer is to try to gravitate towards the lack of toxicity, and then
sure.
thus kind of breed that positivity in wherever you can, because that's that spreads as well, but it does seem like it's much harder to grow that.
I agree with you 100%. You remember Rodney King? You
Yeah,
remember Rodney King?
I was little, but yeah, no,
We
for
we
sure the implications,
we
yeah, in
were
the
having
event.
the same. Listen to me. Rodney King was George Floyd, and George Floyd was Rodney King. It was the same bullshit. And you know what our bosses did? Fuck them. Go out there and do your job.
Hmm.
We got your back. Nobody was sweating Rodney King across the country. The profession, there were a bunch of guys in LA, man, that got acquitted at the state level, and then the feds came in and charged them with civil rights violations because
Hmm.
that wasn't nobody got their pound of flesh from that. They were found not guilty at the state level. Stacy Coon, Sergeant Stacy Coon, and the people involved in that incident, not guilty. The feds go, not the outcome we wanted. So we're going to try you under civil our jurors, no double jeopardy applies. We're going to charge you. And then, they brought everybody, ran everybody through the ringer. So things, pivotal moments in history have occurred before. That's the only one that I could think back to that was far reaching across the country.
Yeah, that was certainly, I mean, the ripples were so big in both, and the ripples for Ferguson were pretty significant. I would say not as big, but yeah, the events were so different that and the culture is so different in how they would react. And I don't want to, tangent to how we would react to a Rodney King situation now, but I think it would be seen very differently. But I also recognize that societally law is regarded differently, right? Quickly it's changing, and quickly the case law, and someone brought this up in a one of my guests, local cop that's
Talk
changed
to me.
vocation, but how quickly the case law changes, and this is even before 2020, where I provide an anecdote. Hey, when I was testing for the sergeant's test, roughly 6+ years ago, we were accountable for 2 years of case law updates in Washington State and
Okay.
in the Ninth Circuit. And however, to study them, you some of the questions were terrible because it's just some private civilian that was writing the test,
Right.
selling it to civil service, and they're asking about case law. And some of us after the test were talking, we're like, they asked about that case, but it was reversed within the 2 years, so I didn't know what to
What's
answer.
the answer? Yeah.
Yeah. And so, for these new officers, like academy is not super long. It never has been. And you're expected to learn this volume of information, but
If I
it's
may interject,
changed.
my wife
Yeah.
is a hairdresser. She did 700 more hours to get her hairdressing cosmetology license than I did to become a cop.
That's legit. So any trade, any artisan, like my deputy chief comes from a mechanic background. Like, his family ran a shop for a number of years. And but he gives that example. He's like, hey, like trades work, we have the majority patrol guys like 3 years and gals, and we want them to be just capable enough to be on their own after about 6 months, including some pre-academy and all that. But
Right.
yeah, he's like, you don't want a 1 or 2 year plumber touching your house. You don't want a 1 or 2 year mechanic with full reign of your engine.
We care more
But
about
here we
people in
are.
the service industry than our tradesmen, than people that have the ability to take life.
Take life, interact with rights. Like, are you supporting or are you removing constitutional rights? Like
What
your foundational freedoms?
Eric will
Yeah,
figure it out. Come on, Eric. Just
it's
figure it
nuts,
out.
right? So it's in some ways and I try to curb my cynicism, but in some ways it's like you get what you pay for, right? If we talk about through the country, officers not making decent wages, and yet what we expect them to do, and yet what we expect them to sacrifice for their families and their potential, not just livelihood, but their potential lives and their legal knowledge and split second decisions, all these things that your audience is very familiar with. But like,
We're asking for superhuman behavior.
yeah, yeah, it's like,
And we're not investing in superhuman behavior. We want you to be a track star, but we won't give you running shoes. We
yeah,
won't give you the equipment.
yeah, you go to a 7-Eleven, you're gonna ask the guy that's with, the roller hot dog thing, you want him to make you like a 5-star gourmet meal. Like,
I like your analogy way
he
better,
doesn't
man.
have the
Yeah.
equipment or the or the
Or the
raw material. He
knowledge. He
might be
doesn't know
he might be an
how.
artist, right? But like,
Yeah,
he
man.
doesn't. He's gonna make it out of hot dogs and
Yeah.
burritos. I don't think so, man.
Oh man. He may be well intended. It just doesn't cut the mustard, unfortunately,
Yeah.
dude.
So
So what are some things specifically you did to appeal to what are they, Gen Zers now?
I think it's Gen Z. Yeah, you can
I
call it
can't
Gen
keep
Z.
up, man. I can't keep up.
Yeah, technically, I was really optimistic when I was a young adult. They were talking about Generation Y, and I was like, I think that's me, because after the X, but then they called it millennials. I was like, oh, that sounds so bad. And then it was like
It does have some sort
Justin
of,
Bieber and all that,
it
because I feel
has a
too old for
less
that.
than competent connotation to it, doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah, millennials is like, push button, instant gratification, but I will say, like, I know what a typewriter is. I had a typewriter in our house.
Yeah.
I grew up most of my childhood with no computer. We had one landline. We had to share
Right.
that for internet when we finally had it. Yeah. So
Okay.
and some people are like, boo-hoo, but I'm just saying, I'm not trying to
Yeah,
act like I didn't
you
have
weren't
things, but
playing you were in the middle, man.
yeah, I didn't have like, it didn't have like an iPod, iPhone, like YouTube, all these things. Like, no, you had to wait for things. You had to take turns. So,
My
um,
when I went to college, there was one we had to handwrite, and we would pay secretaries in the admin building to type because the typewriter, fuck, that's a lot of money, man. And
mm,
we had one kid, Michael Swicklow. I'm butchering his last name. He had a dot matrix printer and like some XY computer. It print it like you would have thought that he was in charge of NASA.
yeah,
The
how heavy
only
was that? How big was that
computer,
thing?
oh, this monstrosity. But like he was the only kid that in the whole class that had a computer.
Yeah.
Crazy.
So a rarity. No, so I deviate, but yeah, how do you engage them? And it's like meeting them where they are. And I think that's a common theme with, with any group, right? You want to talk about generational, you want to talk about just a different cultural group or different profession or different niche. Like, you got to go to them, right? So we talk about the old hiring when I came in or when you came in, like, no, you line up and you're ready and you're gonna stand. You'll wait outside and you'll hike in the rain, all that to get the job interview, to get in the testing
Right.
process. But we had to make it easy to reach us. And what I mean by that is, like, no, we made sure to stick to our standards. I see headlines and I post and write about them, which frustrate the lowering of standards, the removal of fitness standards.
Mm,
All this stuff is pretty concerning to me, but that's a tangent. But we had to make ourselves available, right? And it wasn't just, hey, check the website and get at me when you're ready. It's we would go to sites, we would go to events, we would share our numbers. Me and my recruiter, it's disgusting how much overtime we worked, and my it's the most overtime I ever worked in a year, and I was no stranger to street overtime. I actually enjoyed it for quite a bit
right.
when I was in patrol, but my phone was always on, and I was always answering, all hours because some of your applicants work all hours, and so who am I to wait, on a good applicant when they're working grave shift and pulling out
Right.
my phone and looking at Outlook, and so just to be available and then mentor and then put that on. We talk about culture. So I wanted to demonstrate this culture that we wanted to be about at our agency, which was, hey, we care about wellness, we care about culture. You're seen, you're heard, you're a valuable member before you even sign on. So as a candidate, you're valued. And then when you come in, hopefully you see the same.
That's a great, that's a great introduction for them to the agency. Hey, if you don't give a shit about me during the time where you should be whining and dining me, for lack of a better term, what's it going to
Hmm.
be like once I sign on? It's a to I guess what you were describing to me is kind of like a courtship a little bit, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's not knowing directly what the private sector does, but at the same time, like, I do have friends, the majority of my friends work in the private sector. And when they choose who they want to work for, they think about pay, benefits, culture, opportunity, how people are treated. Like, that's a thing, right? So I invited the candidates. I'm like, hey, I'm not going to rush you. I'm not going to push you. I'm not going to give you a deadline or an ultimatum because I think that signals what that boss is like when you sign on. And so when you do your exploration, please check out other agencies, but then ask around, like, if you didn't work here, where would you work? And I would like to think that our agency would come up, a handful of times, maybe not all the time because not everyone wants the same thing,
Right.
um, but yeah, it's just you make it about the candidate truly and be pretty unapologetic about what you are about because the converse is you say what you think they want you to hear or what what you think they want to hear, and then they come in and they're like, this is I mean, Tung was pretty chill guy, but everyone's talking to me like a drill sergeant and calling me a
Yeah.
little, a little turd. Like
Man,
I'm,
Tongue pulled a fast one on me, man.
and you know what? Today they will leave, and not only will they leave, the next agency will pick them right up because they need to. And it's not like a judgment call. And I know that there's a lot of question of loyalty, but we get it both ways, right? Like we had a guy that graduated from academy, and then he popped smoke with his academy buddy, and they both went to work for this other city that they wanted to work for. That was a bit safer, a bit slower,
Right.
pretty good benefits, good reputation, which that was hard, because you put a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot
Sure.
of investment in someone. But at the same time, we have someone leaving a pretty toxic culture in the region coming over. We're like, come on in. And
Right.
then what's a new thing is that Chiefs are having the conversation, hey man, hate to tell you, but yeah, we're picking up one of your guys because they're all cordial and or buddies,
Right.
especially regionally. And but it used to be like a no-fly zone. Like, Chief's not going to do that to someone else, but it's a different dynamic now.
So let's make our transition now from recruitment to retention. Um, what are we doing? What are you doing, right? To keep that from, your age. You've spent a fair amount of time courting, not pressuring, really just showing the applicant all the reasons why this move aligns with what they want. Uh,
Hmm.
they get there. What are we doing to keep them there? Because I think agencies are finding out that culture almost trumps everything. I mean, we've got some agencies throwing around a ridiculous amount of money for signing bonuses and that's not moving the needle. What's your take on that, Eric?
Yeah, so it's a lot of pieces. I mean, for one, you're right, the money doesn't talk loud enough. I'm not trying to disparage Seattle, but that's the one that people ask about nationally. They're like, is it really that bad? And people in Seattle, like that are staying, they're so loyal to the community and each other, and like my hats are off to them. But regional cops feel for them and the pressure that they're under and feeling like they can never win with counsel and all these things. Now, at the same time, you have so many agencies, people in the region aren't going to lateral to Seattle. Maybe people out of state because the quality of life and the pay and all these things. And otherwise, you're appealing to homegrown guys and gals that want to affect that community, right? Not the city next door, not my town, not the suburbs, but Seattle, because the need is there. And so again, I applaud the crud out of them, right? So when it goes to retaining, and that's a culture thing, and that's where I for sure have had my stints in the last few years from as a sergeant, from patrol, whatever hat I was wearing at the time, where I just wanted to pull my hair out and beat on, like, throw my fist through the bottom of the desk because I was like, do you guys not get it that we keep fighting ourselves, right? And
Mm.
these are conversations what I've had with a lot of colleagues, a lot of buddies at different agencies where it all seems to be similar, right? Like no cop is going through or no department is going through a unique set of circumstances, but a lot of times it's those toxic individuals that their attitude permeates, right? They suck the life out of the room and too much, and we don't keep them in check. And it truly is everyone's job, right? So culture, I like to remind everyone it's their job because you could be an officer saying it's the sergeant's job. You could be a sergeant saying it's the chief's job, and the chief's job
Yeah.
directly back in the same conversation saying, no, culture is morale is your job, Sarge. And
Yeah.
the thing is, everyone's right because everyone has a hand and everyone contributes to it literally every day that you're saying something, you're interacting with someone. And I love that you even highlight, we're speaking about culture because it's not just retention, but that's your legitimacy. That's how you are interacting in the community. That's whether people think that you're public servants or they think you're thugs. And both exist in this country, right?
Oh, most certainly. Most certainly. Yeah, I think, unfortunately, I think we have a propensity to avoid doing the hard work,
Mhm.
right? And the hard work is maintaining a culture of caring, everyone. Um, and it starts with how we treat ourselves, right? Our self care, how we treat each other. Because if we're constantly pointing fingers, like that's your job, it's not my job, then nobody's taking ownership of it, and things don't ever get better.
Yeah.
Um, and I like that you said, it's everyone's, morale, shaping the culture of an organization is everyone's responsibility.
Yeah, and I think I'm fair in assuming that a good portion of your audience, because of the topics you're talking about, because of what this is all about, they're into self-development, they're self-critical, they're probably high achievers, high drive, they're trying to figure out the next thing. And so I just want to insert that because for a little bit I felt that as one of the more seasoned sergeants or maybe mid range for experience at the time, but definitely resonated with the older audience and had the relation with a lot of the younger officers because I was the peer support guy, because, I'd been through critical incidents. I was pretty, um, I feel like I had good organizational stock and buy-in. I did put a lot of pressure on myself, a little bit of Jocko, like extreme ownership.
Yeah, man.
I took that on, but I took it on a little too much, right? Where at
Okay.
first I was like, man, if someone's gonna help morale, like I have the seat, like I have the microphone, I have these things. And then when it go to recruiting, I was like, man, I'm like literally one of the most visible public guys, right? I'm on social media, I'm on the news here, with my recruiter. We're going on this podcast, we're talking about police applicants and the regional challenges. And so I'm like, man, if I can't do it, I don't know who can. So I put that on me, but really it's not me, like I'm just
Yeah.
that's my ego bleeding over, right? Like if you take extreme ownership too far, and Jocko and company talk about that on their podcast, but if you let it go too far, then you've let your ego extend way too far. And I took that so personally and so
Mm.
emotionally, but really recognizing and honestly, the change in assignment kind of helps because I know I'm not the cool sergeant anymore. I'm the brass. I'm management. And so with that recognition is not that I can't have relationships, but I don't have the touch and I don't have the span, and that's not my job role to talk to 8 or 10 officers for a portion of my day every day. I try to
Right.
grab a couple here and there, but I have to trust in my sergeants that they care,
Right.
and I can mentor them the best I can, but I have to release control, and I have to trust that they're about that too, and do the best I can from where I am, and trust that everyone else is going to be too.
And that relationships gets developed, and that culture gets passed on by the relationships that you have with your sergeants now.
I have to trust that. Yeah, I know that, not everyone's going to be me. My sergeants aren't going to be a mini me, and they shouldn't be. And man, we'd have a garbage agency if the people that worked under
Right.
me were all, trying to emulate me or
No,
trying to, yeah, we can't
they
be the
just need to
same.
know that you care. You care more
Yeah.
about them than you do yourself.
And that trickle down's huge, right? As a sergeant, I really wanted to not think that the upper management had that big of an influence. And you'll hear it both ways, right? You'll hear a lot of industry experts, a lot of people that are experts on culture talk about the impact of the line level or the, first line supervisors, and they're right, but also you see how quickly the number one person with the biggest uh soapbox or platform or microphone or what have you influence, how quickly they can dissolve everything good going on with just one bad move, right? One bad statement. It just erodes confidence. And so while I do want to empower everyone, whoever they are, whether formal or informal leader, to do the best they can, like that trickle down effect is huge. And so it is important when we talk about promotions and all that.
I have spent, Eric, the vast majority of my time that I've been retired trying to empower the line supervisors and below to, it's a losing battle, but I'm trying to remove the impact of poor leadership on their decision making process and how they run their shop and how they develop culture and camaraderie. And um, you're right. Speaking to your point exactly, ultimately, if there's weak leadership, an absence of leadership at the top, its tentacles are gonna inevitably reach the rest of the organization. At that point, it's line supervision trying to mitigate the impact.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's where wellness is a big piece, right? We opened with that, and that is something I'm passionate about. I didn't grow up with a really healthy lifestyles, eating, a sleeve of Oreos like every other kid, that had a latchkey kid watching cartoons instead of doing homework until my parents came home from work. So that was, childhood in the 90s. But
Right.
I didn't grow up with sports either, right? So that's kind of double whammy. But I got into fitness enough to be proficient in college. When I was going after this job, I took it more seriously. And then it was once I was in this job, I'm in patrol and there's foot chases and people are resisting DV arrests. It's all the things that happen in police work. And I gravitated towards that. I didn't think I would. I thought I'd be going towards the detective route. I'm pretty analytical by nature, and no, I wanted to do the running and gunning. I want to do the chase. So I got really into canine, and I ended up doing that in my career. But
Oh, wait
with
a minute.
that,
I didn't know you worked a patrol dog.
yeah, patrol dog. So 5-ish
Wow.
years until I promoted
Nice.
sergeant. We retired the dog. Yeah. So, but with
We
that,
got
like I
we got
was like,
more in common than I knew.
oh yeah,
Oh,
okay,
I
I didn't
worked a
know your
patrol
dog in there.
dog in the '90s, man.
Okay, so yeah, there's an inner circle. Like people know, okay, like SWAT dudes, they get around together and they get really like
Dude.
douchey, but then canines do too.
Yeah, man.
So like,
I got my bite book, man. Um,
mm,
yeah.
yeah, mine is
The,
somewhere.
the
It's
the
not
yeah,
not
I
not in
don't
my
know where it
possession.
is. I can't
Yeah, yeah,
confirm or deny that it exists, but
yeah,
maybe it did.
yeah, man. But
But
I wanted to be strong. I want to be quick. You got to
yeah,
lift the
man.
dog. You got to fight guys alongside the dog. I want to be fast and close
You're
distance in the
hunting,
sprint,
man.
but
You're
also,
hunting bad guys.
yeah,
Yeah.
you gotta, just jog awkwardly for a couple miles sometimes on a big track. And So I got really into fitness and I got really into nutrition, and then my sleep was terrible. So I got really into researching sleep. And so that's where the wellness perspectives come in. And rather than just feel like a feel good thing, no, it's performance. Like that's the base of it. I love the aspects that all these things should be intertwined with a healthy culture because your officers feel cared for, and you're caring for them if you help them attune to these things. You build them into their day to day. You give them all the resources and enable them to seek those. But at the same time, it comes all the way back to doing the job and being effective. So that's where it's tough for me to see the disconnect. But I hope that even more traditional minds, even more logic based minds can see, hey, it might feel kind of woo woo to ask an officer to take a moment, 5 minutes, out of their day, just to sit in the sub, close their eyes, just breathe for a little bit, and then maybe go into the gym, 20 minutes, throw some weights around. You might feel like they shouldn't have to do that at work, but the fact is a lot of them aren't going to do it at home because they're already
Right.
on way too long of shifts, commutes. They're already kind of ignoring their family. We know how first responder life goes, so why not enable them to have all the tools and resources at work so they can be their best? And then they're going to be the most effective, most operationally sound officer that can do all the hard things, recover quickly, be resilient. I mean, that's what the community wants, right? It's not
Yeah.
just, sloughing stuff, working out on duty and chilling out. Like
Yeah.
it
So
is and it
there's an
isn't.
actual, there's a science-based benefit behind having our officers do these things. It,
Yeah, all of it. Like
it's
if
not
you
to
can breathe.
avoid work. It's to be better at when the call comes in.
Yeah. And if some old school chiefs and sheriffs think that, them taking a moment between calls is lazy. I mean,
Oh,
if you could recognize for a moment that just if people can breathe and take a click, reduce their stress, bring that cortisol down, they're going to be less likely to sock that a-hole in the face that just did
right.
that to a kid out of nowhere, right? Like
That
they're going to be
they're
less likely to get
mitigating stress.
complaints.
Yeah.
For sure, it's huge. And so yeah, same thing. Like it boggles my mind that there's still departments that have a policy where they could get hemmed up if they work out on duty, right? So if you have someone on a treadmill or like going to their local gym or even like I mean technically like I pushed my car in a parking lot in the middle of the night with my buddies like to stay
Right.
awake in graveyard and stay, we didn't
Right.
get a workout in, so we pushed a car in neutral and we do pull-ups at the jungle gym.
Yeah.
But some people get hemmed up for that. Like you're out of your mind and you're in the
Yeah.
stone age. Like get with the times.
I'll say this. You brought up some really great points. Um, Taking time and allowing our men and women to work out on duty. Listen, the job already takes enough from their families. Why don't we, right, as part of, if we really gave a shit about them being the best mums and dads, um, and husbands and wives, we would understand the commitment that they're making, allow them to practice some self-care at work, get a workout in, do some meditation. So when they do go home, that's one less thing that they need to fit into a schedule that's going to take them further away from their family.
For sure.
I mean, I
Yeah, and if you
love
go back
that.
to operations, like, yeah, if someone's having turmoil at home, do you think they're going to be an effective officer? Like, we know that's not true.
Of
We
course.
know how that surfaces at work.
Right. I said my old agency, one, you're working out on duty. They just built and blew out like a multi-million dollar gym.
Nice.
I mean, eh, professional sports teams would
Mm-hmm.
love to have the setup that the Broward County Sheriff's Office has. It's amazing. Um, and what they also have, they have a pilot program in one of the districts. It's called the Zen Den.
Mm.
It's a
Yeah, I'm hearing
blackout
more about this. Yeah.
Dude, it's a blackout room with a calm app on a TV and a massage chair. You give your
Mm-hmm.
radio to your sergeant, and you go in there and you decompress. You're exhausted because the baby kept you up all day and you need
Yeah.
to go in there and close your eyes. Not a problem.
Yeah. That's huge because again, if you go back to ops, like who hasn't worked graveyard and has been drifting in the lanes on duty? And people would
How
be
many
terrified to
times,
admit it,
Eric?
but
How many times, Eric, by the grace of God, you make it home
mm-hmm.
because
Yeah,
your
yeah,
eyes are like
that's
flaming
me, man.
meatballs in your head, right?
Yeah. And a lot of people would be terrified to admit it, even those X number of years ago, but I'll admit it. I've admitted it before. Like I've told my guys, like, hey, if you're tired, tap your buddy and say, hey, I'm gonna close my eyes for a bit. Because if
All the
you're gonna
time.
wreck, man, like we can't have that.
Eric,
You
I've wrecked on my way home.
mm,
I totaled my Durango
ooh,
on my only by the grace of God, man, that I didn't hit anybody else um, or kill myself. But it, the human body can only take so much,
mm-hmm.
and that drowsy driving, not that we'll segue into that, but that's worse than drunk driving.
Yeah, for sure. And I love that, your old agency has a facility that is fit for pros, and this notion is being socialized more where wellness peeps and, progressive, innovative police leaders are like, that's exactly how I need to treat my officers. Like I need them to be professional level athletes, right?
Yep.
It's not just like the machine, but the brain, right? I need people to make these split-second decisions. I need their eyes to be communicating to their brain quickly. I can't just have them all jacked up on stimulants and
Right.
fatigued. So you get them the equipment, you get them the time, they take their leave, and it's all part of the same puzzle, right? It's all contributing back into what we really need, which is healthy, able cops to do the thing.
I love that. That's so in alignment with what we need to be doing, and where I think a lot of agencies are starting to figure it out. Like, hey, this is how we this is how we need to actually care. We need to care more about our people than we have been, and then when we do that, that's the ROI. That's the return. Um, Bringing the conversation, Eric, to retirement. Um, I didn't realize this until I retired, right? I mean, it's one of those things like you think like, oh, this is what I'm gonna do. And I think there's a lot of room for improvement on what we do for our people to prepare them for the second chapter. Um, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that is very much a piece of the puzzle, and I think sadly it is a bit of an afterthought, right? But I'm glad you hit it in the progression. That's where your insight is so key, right? And we see it. So people that have been in the industry for a bit, they personally know they have these strong bonds with people that they get to retirement and they have a smile on their face up to retirement, not just because the dates come in, but just because they've felt purpose, they've been balanced, they've been taking care of themselves if they've not been given extra resources, right? Like, so I think we need to pay note and notice what they were doing to navigate the career and thrive, not just because they finally got to get out of the furnace, but because they were managing through healthy coping and relationships, right? So with that in mind, like we quickly, maybe way more easily know what the converse looks like, what people that are either so apathetic and disconnected for years before retirement because they're burned out, or people are overinvested and they have a hard time retirement, or they have a hard time in retirement because they have no other sense of identity. And these are things that luckily are being socialized now in academy. That's something that they talked about when I came in, but it's easier said than done, right? Especially if you don't have these the supportive mechanisms to help guide that, right? Overwork is oftentimes rewarded, and I'm not saying that it shouldn't be, because we have a lot of work to do and a lot of us are understaffed and all these things, right? But it's not sustainable, right? It comes at a cost, and we need to recognize that
Yeah.
if we're going to curb these numbers, and what is the average retirement post law enforcement, like after a full career is like 3 or 5 years till someone passes. It's
Yeah,
pretty significant, the amount of pension that's not pooled by full-fledged career, guys and gals. I'd wager it's mostly guys, right? Gals do a better job taking care of themselves generally in
generally,
the
yeah.
populace. So yeah, a huge conversation. And to answer your question briefly, I'd say, yeah, it starts at the beginning, right? What culture are we bringing people into, and what are they maintaining? What is normal in our culture to support them through the career, not just so they send off right, but just because it so to make it smooth, right? To make it natural.
Right. I found that, this transition, um, there was a documentary. I talk about it all the time on Netflix, like How to Live to Be 100 or something. And
Yeah.
interesting, right?
Is it a
They did,
blue zone thing?
yes, Blue Zone thing.
Hmm.
Um, you know how many blue zones are in the United States?
One.
Zero, my friend.
I thought it was Loma Linda, the Seventh Day Adventists, California.
Oh,
We'll look it up afterwards, but
all right. Listen,
yeah, it's
to
a
my
small
point.
like
Yeah, to my
community.
point, man. Because we really don't get it right. We've got this thing like, well, when I retire, I'm gonna go fishing every day, go golfing, and I'm not gonna do a thing.
Hmm.
And that's correct. You don't do a thing, and that accelerates your demise. You know, the concept is you don't ever retire. You always have purpose, you always have social engagement, and
Hmm.
you just change that mission, change that why. And that's what keeps you alive. But I don't know that that's definitely an area that we can be doing better. Maybe we meet with our retirees a year out and put them on a program. Like, how do we keep you with purpose and committed to you moving forward through this process? I think that there's a big void there. There are a bunch of people in this space um, trying to provide that guidance and direction, and it's
Hmm.
important. But a lot of times, I think again, it's like a lot of things that we see. It can be a little overly reactive in cases. Maybe a little too late. When we know your retirement date, and so what are we doing to make sure that that transition into that second chapter is healthy for you and your family?
Yeah. And it's a balance. And I don't want to put everything on the employer because people have to live their own lives and you can
100%.
provide all these resources, right? But is anyone going to take them unless you make it mandatory? And then it has a different flavor. And people, as soon as you throw the M word around, some people want to rebel and then they're going to,
Sure.
complicit, malicious compliance, right? Just to
Right.
do it. So they're going to sit in the gym and not get any value. Like that's,
Right.
that's kind of worse now.
The
But
beatings will continue until morale improves.
yeah, exactly. So, but yeah, I think that it's mindful to be, if not official, like part of the culture. Like we have a retiree breakfast annually, and I don't think we do much, right? We do that, and then people they can qual, they can, maintain their retirement commission, their certification to carry. But then it's an opportunity where people can catch up, and
Yeah.
social media makes it easier. But going back to the difference in lifespan for men and women, like we know that you look up the studies. I'm not going to cite them. I can't. But women lean into community, right? They maintain relationships. But the problem with men is we don't talk. And so, going back to a lot of what we talked about towards the beginning is like just talk. And I'm not trying to box out women. It's just statistically they
No,
do a
they do a
better
better
job.
job at it.
Yeah. So like in the incidence of suicide, extreme depression is just so much more prevalent with men and boys that you see that it's not to say it's to say kudos, you're doing a better job. We need
Right.
to do more of what you're
Maybe there's
doing.
something for us to learn there.
Yeah, yeah, and women live longer, and you wonder how much of that is, just community. And so going back to the blue zones you're talking about, and there's so many debates about it, but one thing that I think is hard to ignore is like the sense of community that those
Yes.
quote unquote communities have, those regions have. It's like they talk to their neighbors, they go, whether it's
Right.
church or their group, they do things together, they have
Yep.
strong sense of purpose. Like
Yep.
back to what you're saying, like those are non-negotiables. Like why does your heart keep ticking if you don't give it a reason to do it?
Right. It's certainly waking up tomorrow um is a lot easier if you have a reason to wake up.
Hmm.
Dude.
Yeah,
Dude, I have absolutely loved this conversation, Eric. Um
me too, man.
what I want to do this. If you could, I want you to leave the listener with some thoughts on maybe the state of the union. And I know it's a heavy ask, bro. It's a heavy ask. And then I want to go into where we can find you, what you're doing before we wrap, brother.
Yeah, the state of the union is it's getting better, and that's without going down a rabbit hole, like that's what I'll say. And maybe it doesn't feel like it's getting better in your hood or your department, but know that it is somewhere, and that's what you got to pay attention to, right? So if that positivity isn't in your building, you got to look at the articles, look at what other PDs are doing, reach across the state line, or your neighbors, like where are people getting hired, where are people staying, and figure out what programs, what policies, what ideas they have, and run it up, right? Ownership, like work with your bosses, get them aligned, and ultimately, if they're not, you don't need to be a martyr. You can walk with your feet, and some people have found that they were facing burnout. They didn't know if cop job was right for them or not, and they went somewhere else, and they felt like they hit the refresh button. And I think that's valuable to talk about too, right? Again, no judgment if you leave law enforcement, but there is so much value in a quality lateral officer that if you still think you have it in you, maybe you just need a change of scenery. And
Mm,
I got a lot of buddies that did that, and they were able to find that. People that came to my department from elsewhere in the state or in the country, and they were able to do that. And so we need all the help we can get. And so that's a valuable asset, to a resource that we shouldn't turn away. We shouldn't ignore.
yeah. No, try to be the change agent. And if that, those attempts have been met with
Fruitless. Yeah. And
resistance
like,
and unsuccessful, man, there's look to see where things are going right and where people are thriving, and
yeah.
and let that be the catalyst for your move.
Yeah, and one last thing about that is that I have to be reminded to be patient, and I feel like I'm patient, but some of my bosses or mentors are like, "Hey man, like as far as culture change, that's slow." And then you're talking about government, slower. And then you talk about cops, like stubborn cops, like that's even slower. So
Dude.
realize that if you're getting that inch, like recognize it is a
Yeah,
mile.
right,
So if you are appealing to the bosses or to your department and you're making little wins, then that's awesome, right? Because you
right.
are setting up the next generation for way more success. But if it's met with apathy, total apathy, or maybe even you feel like you're getting scrutinized because of it, then maybe it's not for you, right? The
Yeah.
culture there might have been too corrosive.
No, that's getting back to that serenity prayer, brother.
That's huge.
It,
Yeah.
it's huge. It's huge. I know bluegritwellness.com, right?
Yep. Yep. And
Um,
I'm on Instagram. That's where I'm most active. So I started the blog at the website. It's hard for me to get in there. The millennial in me, it's easier to post on Instagram.
okay.
So yeah, it's Blue Grit Wellness on Instagram, and then the podcast is what I also try to stay pretty regular on. And it's law enforcement. It's more of a focus on culture and people's careers, um, and mindset, as well as some health and wellness
Awesome.
speakers, right? So trainers, nutritionists, MHPs, kind of talking about stress. So hodgepodge of things.
Another
Yeah,
awesome resource to find out more about what you don't know, man,
yeah,
and add value to your life.
yeah. And look
Oh,
out for Mr. John Kelly on Blue Grit Radio before too long. We got
oh,
to get that scheduled up next.
dude,
So
I'd be honored, man.
yeah,
I'd be
it'll
honored.
happen soon.
Ladies and gentlemen, Eric Tung, brother, man, this has been one of the best conversations I've ever had, man. I really enjoy speaking with you. And listen, with guys like you still in it, man, I am overly optimistic, right? Overly optimistic for the state of the union and where this profession's going, man. So keep getting after it. Keep doing an amazing job. I appreciate
Thank
you.
you, man. No, I'm humbled. It's just I'm one part in a big network, and that's where I get my motivation and inspiration is guys like you. And appreciate you having me on, man.
Awesome, brother. We'll talk soon.